Hey everyone, if you enjoy my park ranger horror stories, I've started uploading them on Spotify too. My YouTube channel got demonetized, so I'm putting a lot more focus into Spotify now. You'll find daily scary stories there with longer, darker, and more immersive horror content. If you want to support the channel, please go follow the Spotify page and leave a 5-star rating. It genuinely helps me keep making these stories. The Spotify link is in the description and pinned comment. Turn off the lights. Put on your headphones and I'll see you there. My name is Douglas Hartwell, and I want to tell you what really happened in Blood Holler. Not the official version that's in the ranger station files. Not what people told the newspapers. The real story. I've been a ranger for 18 years. 18 years of marking trails, rescuing lost hikers, dealing with poachers and drunk campers. I know the Monongahela National Forest like I know my own hands. Every ridge, every stream, every dangerous cliff that tourists think is a good photo spot. I'm not a fanciful man. My father was a coal miner who died of black lung before I turned 20. My mother died when I was born. My grandmother raised me alone, and she didn't have patience for ghost stories or superstitions. Hard work and facts. That's how we survived. That's what I believed in. I'd heard all the local folklore about Blood Holler, sure. Stories about something that drank blood. Disappearances that went back hundreds of years. Old miners who quit their jobs talking about creatures in the tunnels. I dismissed it all as Appalachian superstition. People see strange shadows in the dark and invent monsters to explain them. That's what I thought. Blood Holler is a ravine about 2 miles long, really deep and steep. You can drop 400 feet down the sides if you're not careful. The bottom is thick with hemlock trees so old and tall that even at noon it feels like dusk down there. 3 streams run through it, fed by cold mountain springs. Cold enough to kill you if you get wet and can't get warm fast. The rocks are loose shale that crumbles under your feet. There are caves everywhere, some you can see, some hidden behind brush and roots that open up sudden like the earth is swallowing you. The locals avoid it in fall. They said it was bad luck. They said things were more active then. I'd been stationed at the ranger station near Blood Holler for 12 years. Quiet work. Peaceful. I lived alone. My marriage ended a long time ago, when my wife got tired of me caring more about the forest than I cared about her. No kids, no family nearby, just me in the mountains. October 1986 was a normal month until it wasn't. The Caulfield family called in on October 18th. The parents, Margaret and Richard, and their daughter Sarah, 14 years old. They'd gotten the proper permits for a 3-day hiking trip. They seemed prepared. Richard had checked the weather. They had good equipment. They did everything right. I radioed their required check-in points. Everything normal. They were at their campsite in Blood Holler, about half a mile in from the entrance. Richard's voice came through clear on the radio. They were settling in for the night. All good here, Ranger Station. We'll check in again tomorrow evening. They never did. When they missed the next check-in, I contacted the other rangers. We assembled a search team. 12 people, some dogs, and a helicopter on standby. I told myself it was probably nothing. Radio malfunction. They got delayed and lost track of time. We'd find them tired but fine. Maybe a little scared. That's not what we found. We reached their camp in the early afternoon. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was even for a forest. No birds, no insects. Just the sound of wind in the high branches and the streams below. The tents were still there. Their sleeping bags, their food packs, their hiking equipment. All of it scattered around like they'd left in a hurry. The campfire had burned down to cold ash. They'd been gone for almost a day at least. Then I saw it. Blood on the tent fabric. A lot of it. Dark brown stains spread across the nylon like something had bled out there. Not a little cut or scrape. This was serious blood loss. Get the dogs, I said to Deputy Ranger Voss. My voice sounded strange in that quiet place. The dogs didn't want to go. That was the first real sign. Something was wrong. These were good search dogs, trained animals, used to finding people. They came maybe 200 yards from camp, and then they started whimpering. Their handlers had to almost drag them, and they kept trying to back away, their ears flat against their heads. We found Richard about 400 yards deeper into the ravine. He was hanging from a tree branch about 8 feet up. Just hanging there like someone had carefully positioned him. But there was no rope around his neck. His arms hung down at his sides. And his skin was the color of old paper, dead white. His lips were pale, almost translucent. His eyes were open and staring at nothing. Jesus, someone whispered behind me. The coroner later said Richard had been completely exsanguinated. That's the medical term. It means his blood was gone. All of it. or almost all of it. The body had maybe half a cup left in the entire circulatory system, but there were no large wounds, no slashes, just small marks on his neck and wrists, like he'd been tapped, like someone had very carefully removed every single drop of blood from his body, while keeping him alive. How do you get 8 feet up a tree without ropes, without being thrown, without struggle marks? Keep searching. I told the team, though my throat felt tight. Margaret was worse. We found her in a collapsed mining tunnel about half a mile deeper. She was arranged on the ground like someone had posed her. Arms straight out from her sides like she was making a snow angel. Legs perfectly straight. Her ribs were crushed. Actually crushed. Like something with incredible strength had applied pressure to her chest. The coroner said something with enormous power had squeezed her hard enough to break bone. But there were still those same small marks on her neck and wrists. Sarah was nowhere. She could be alive, I told the team, though part of me already knew better. She could be lost. Keep going. We searched until the sun went down. The temperature was dropping. Snow was starting to fall. Just little flakes at first, but the weather report said it would get bad. We could lose the whole area under snow within 12 hours. We could lose Sarah if she was hurt and trapped somewhere. That's when the helicopter arrived. The pilot said later he didn't know what happened. He said instruments went crazy. All of them at once. Navigation, altitude, everything. He said he tried to fight it, but something pushed him down. He said he saw a shape, something massive, something with wings. The helicopter went down near the Huller bottom. 2 crew members died. The pilot lived, but he wouldn't talk much about what he saw. Whenever anyone asked him to describe it, he'd just shake his head and look away. That night, David Marsh disappeared. David was young, only 26, and new to the Ranger Service. Good kid, smart. But something about Blood Holler was getting into his head. He kept saying he heard Sarah calling to him. He'd wander off by himself and we'd have to pull him back. Around midnight, he went into the woods. When we found him in the morning, he was hanging from a tree like Richard had been. Same small marks on his neck and wrists, completely drained. I was holding onto my skepticism by a thread. Dead batteries could explain the helicopter, could explain the radio static and the distortion in our communications. Some kind of wildlife could explain the marks. Some animal we didn't understand, maybe a large bat, something undocumented. Scientists discovered new animals all the time, but something was happening that didn't fit into any rational explanation. The temperature in the Holler bottom was wrong. We measured it. It was 20 degrees colder down there than anywhere around it, but not consistently. One spot would be nearly freezing, and 50 feet away it would be 45 degrees. Our equipment said it, but our bodies felt it too. A cold that wasn't just about temperature. A cold that felt like being watched. Our flashlights weren't working right. The beams came out thin and weak, like the light was being absorbed. And sometimes, I'm telling you this because you need to know, sometimes the light had a greenish color. Not like any flashlight I'd ever seen. At night, the whole Holler glowed, a faint green-blue light with no source, like the air itself was luminescent. Multiple rangers saw it. We documented it. Nobody could explain it. The sounds were the worst part. Voices came out of the darkness. Sometimes they sounded like Sarah. Sometimes they sounded like Richard. Sometimes they sounded like nothing human at all. They'd call out our names or say things we'd recognize, and rangers would start walking toward them before I could stop them. The sound was distorted in ways that hurt to listen to, like it was coming from multiple directions at once, like it was coming from inside your own head. We found tracks. Marcus Voss, one of the more experienced rangers, found them near a cave system. Handprints in the soft earth, but not human hands. The prints had 5 digits, yes, but they were too large, and the fingers seemed wrong. Too long, too jointed, and the depth of the impression suggested whatever made them weighed 300 pounds or more. But the prints showed it walked upright like a person. Marcus found blood patterns on the trees. Dried blood arranged in spirals, too organized to be accidental. Like something was marking territory, like something was painting with blood. I was running out of reasons to stay rational. Helen Foster found what might have been the creature's home. A cave system back in the Holler that seemed to go deep into the mountain. The walls inside were covered with marks, stains, things I didn't want to examine too closely. And bones, animal bones mostly, arranged by size, arranged with horrible careful intention. Some of those bones were old. Helen said a historian could probably date them to centuries ago. Whatever was in Blood Holler wasn't new. It had been there for a very long time. That night I made a decision that violated every safety protocol. I took my rifle, my service pistol, and a strong flashlight. I told the remaining rangers to set up a base camp and wait for the state police backup that was being sent in. Then I went deeper into the holler alone. I was going to find what killed those people. I was going to kill it. The deeper I went, the more the world felt wrong. The temperature kept dropping. The darkness was so complete that even with my flashlight, it felt like I was moving through solid black, the light just carving out a small tunnel through the dark. The smell hit me about a quarter mile in, coppery, like blood, like wet iron mixed with something sweet and rotten. I found the main cave system. The entrance was hidden, just an opening in the ravine wall behind roots and brush. But inside was impossible. The cave opened up into a huge chamber, maybe 80 feet across, and it was a museum of death. Bones covered every surface, arranged in rows and patterns. Human bones mixed with animal bones. Skulls arranged in lines, ribs stacked like firewood. Some of the bones were ancient, bleached white and crumbling. Some were fresh, skin still clinging to them. In the center of the chamber there was more of the blood. Dried on the rocks, on the walls. It made patterns, symbols maybe, or maybe just the random marks of something that had fed here 1,000 times. That's when I heard it. Not heard, felt. A sound that was underneath hearing, a frequency that vibrated inside my chest and pressed against my skull. And underneath it, like words being filtered through static, I understood. Warmth. Red warmth. You taste like the mountain tasted. Let us taste again. It stepped out of the shadows. I've never found the right words to describe it. People always want you to be precise, but precision fails when you're trying to describe something that doesn't fit into any category your brain can understand. It was 7 feet tall, maybe 8. The shape was vaguely human, but only vaguely. The arms were too long, the joints too numerous. The hands had fingers that extended maybe a foot beyond what human fingers should. The skin, it wasn't skin. It was like a membrane stretched over something beneath. Chitinous. With veining visible underneath, dark purple veins carrying dark fluid. It had wings. They were folded against its back, but when it moved, they shifted. Membranous wings, translucent, with veins running through them like an insect's wings. The span had to be 15 feet. The face was the worst. The head was too long. And the mouth stretched from ear to ear. But it wasn't one mouth. There seemed to be multiple openings, feeding structures. Too many teeth, arranged in ways that shouldn't be possible. The voice came again, that subsonic pressure in my chest. You came back. You came back into our home. You understand now. You understand we are learning. I didn't think. I raised my rifle and fired. 6 shots, rapid fire. At point-blank range, I couldn't miss. The bullets struck. I saw them hit, but the creature didn't fall, didn't bleed, didn't react like anything living should react. It just looked at me with something that might have been curiosity. Your kind destroys what it doesn't understand, the voice said. We consume to understand. Which is the greater evil? I ran. I ran through that cave and out into the holler night, and behind me I could hear it following. Not chasing like a predator chases prey. Walking, stalking slowly, like it knew I couldn't escape. It followed me for about half a mile before it just stopped, like there was an invisible line it wouldn't cross. Like this part of the holler was the limit of its territory and it wouldn't go beyond. I didn't stop running until I reached the ranger station. I was shaking so hard I couldn't hold my coffee. My hands were white knuckles. For 6 hours, I couldn't make words come out of my mouth. The other rangers thought I was having a heart attack. Maybe I was. Maybe part of me broke in that cave, and the rest of me never put itself back together quite right. But I knew what I'd seen, and I understood something else now. Something that had been hiding in the back of my mind since we found those bodies. That creature wasn't just hunting, it was learning. It had kept Sarah alive for 8 days not because it was merciful, because it was studying her, feeding on her slowly while examining her body, trying to understand what she was. The next morning we found her. She was in a deeper cave system, hidden behind a rock formation, alive, conscious, but different, changed. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat. When you looked into her eyes, you could see something had shifted inside her. The psychologists called it trauma. Maybe that's what it was. But when I talked to her alone, days later in the hospital, she told me something different. It wasn't cruel, she whispered. It was lonely. It kept asking me questions, not with words, with pressure in my head. It wanted to know what I was thinking, what I felt. It was trying to understand if I was like it. If anything in the world was like it, that's when everything changed for me. I filed a report saying the creature fled the holler, that we believed it had left the area, that further searches would be unproductive. Technically, I lied. Unofficially, I told the remaining rangers to stay away from Blood Holler, to avoid it, to let it be. I said it was dangerous, and we should respect its territory. Some of them understood. Some of them thought I was crazy. I started visiting the holler regularly after that, not to hunt, to observe, to understand. Over the years, I've come to believe the creature is sentient, not like we are, but intelligent, aware, the only one of its kind maybe, living in isolation for who knows how long. It wasn't evil, it was desperate. It needed to understand what other minds were like, because the only mind it had ever known was its own. I did something I've never told anyone. Something that got me transferred twice and almost cost me my job. I went back into the holler alone. I let myself bleed a little. I made contact. Through that blood sharing, I understood something. The creature showed me its consciousness, and I showed it mine. For just a moment, two completely different minds touched, and it was profound and terrible, and the loneliest thing I've ever experienced. Because I realized what it was really looking for. It wasn't food. It was recognition. It was asking, am I the only one? Is there anything else in the universe that thinks like I think? The answer is yes. And that makes it the loneliest creature in the world. I retired from the Ranger Service in 1994. Officially, it was a heart attack. Technically, I was in Blood Holler when it happened. I still visit sometimes, in my dreams. I still feel that cold. I still hear those voices carrying fragments of human speech, like a bird learning to mimic words. And I still understand that Douglas Hartwell, skeptical scientist and man of facts, killed 2 innocent people in self-defense. Because I couldn't understand what the creature was. I couldn't accept something different. The creature didn't kill for hunger, didn't kill for evil. It killed for knowledge. And the worst part? The part that wakes me up at 3 in the morning, we're still the more dangerous species. We destroy what we don't understand. We kill first and ask questions never. The creature just wanted to know if it was alone. And now it knows the answer. My name is Margaret Hollister, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. People think they know what that means. I check permits, mark trails, tell tourists not to feed the bears. But out here in the Great Smoky Mountains, the job is different. I watch the land. I watch what lives on it. I watch what dies on it. My mother was a midwife. She delivered babies in our small Tennessee town while my father worked the mines, and I grew up believing there were explanations for everything. When people were sick, it was disease. When animals died, it was predators or poison. When people reported seeing things that weren't there, it was their imagination working overtime, shaped by rural poverty and long nights with too much time to think. My mother always said that superstition was just ignorance with a good story. Attached to it, she died in 1968 when I was 30 years old. Cancer, there was no mystery to it, no ghosts or curses. Just cells going wrong and time running out. I became a ranger to leave that world behind. I got an education. I studied biology. I published papers about Appalachian wildlife. I married Thomas, who was also a ranger, and we built a life based on facts and observation. We were happy not having children. We were happy having the mountains to ourselves. I should have paid more attention to the old stories. Whaling Ridge sits in the heart of the park, a long chain of peaks that runs about 8 miles through some of the most beautiful and dangerous terrain in Tennessee. The elevation climbs past 5,000 feet, and the wind up there is constant and cold, even in summer. That's where the ridge gets its name. When the wind comes through just right, it sounds like something is screaming. Most rangers avoid the ridge in summer. I never thought much about that until June of 1987. I was 49 years old and didn't believe in anything I couldn't measure. I believed in wind patterns and animal vocalizations. I believed in echoes and human psychology. I believed that old stories were the nervous system of a poor people, transmitting fear and superstition from one generation to the next. That certainty is what I'm most ashamed of now. On June 3rd, a hiker reported finding dead deer scattered across the western slope of the ridge. That's unusual, but not impossible. Animals die in clusters sometimes. Disease outbreaks, environmental toxins, contaminated water sources. But when I arrived with my assistant ranger Edward Rivera, what I found made me stop walking. There were 40 of them, maybe more, all within a 3-mile zone. All fresh enough that the bodies hadn't started decomposing in the heat, which meant they'd all died within the past few days. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was how they died. Every single animal showed signs of massive internal bleeding. Blood had come out of their eyes, their ears, their mouths. But there were no marks on any of them, no claw wounds, no bite injuries, no crushing damage. It was as if their bodies had been broken from the inside by something invisible. I've seen disease in animals before. I've seen poisoning. I've seen predator kills. I'd never seen anything like this. Is it contagious? Edward asked. He was young, only in his 20s, and I could hear the worry in his voice. He was thinking about the people who hiked this trail, the children. I don't know yet, I told him, and that was the most honest thing I said all day. I ordered samples collected. I called the lab at the U skis and told them to prioritize the analysis. I called Thomas at base camp and asked him to come help with the investigation. And then I stood on that ridge, looking at 40 dead deer, and felt the first real tremor of uncertainty crack through my scientific certainty. The wind was blowing hard, even in early afternoon, and it sounded different than I remembered. Almost like it was shaped into something. Almost like it was trying to form words. We set up camp on the eastern slope of the ridge on the evening of June 8th. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, visibility for miles, temperature hovering around 58 degrees. I brought recording equipment to capture the ambient sounds of the ridge. I wanted to document the wind patterns, analyze the acoustics, prove scientifically why people thought they heard something supernatural up here. Thomas thought I was being obsessive. He was probably right. Edward seemed nervous the whole afternoon as we set up the tents. He kept looking at the ridge top where the sun was dropping behind the peaks, and he kept scanning the tree line. When I asked him if he was okay, he just said he didn't like the wind up here. It made him feel watched. Wind doesn't have eyes, I told him, which was the kind of stupid thing a scientist says when she's confident she understands the world. We ate dinner as the sun set. The temperature was already dropping, the wind was picking up, and around 11 o'clock, while Thomas was organizing equipment and Edward was sitting by the small fire we'd built, the wailing started. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't the kind of sound that builds slowly. One moment there was just the regular sound of ridge wind, that hollow rushing noise that moves through tree branches and rock faces. The next moment, that sound had transformed into something else, something with a voice. I've tried to describe this wailing sound 100 times in 100 different ways, and I still can't find the right words. It was like someone screaming, but the pitch was wrong. It wasn't quite in the range of a human scream, and that wrongness made your brain react in a primitive way. Your body knew something was not right, even if your mind couldn't process exactly what. Edward's nose started bleeding. Not a little nosebleed, not the kind where a few drops come out. His nose suddenly started flowing blood like someone had opened a faucet inside his head. He jumped up from the fire, putting his hands to his face in shock, and blood streamed between his fingers. "What's happening?" he gasped, the panic obvious in his voice. Thomas was moving toward him, reaching for a first aid kit, but my attention had snagged on something else. The barometric pressure gauge I'd set up was going crazy. The needle was dropping so fast I thought the device was broken. Steady drops. 1.2 millibars per second. That's not possible. Atmospheric pressure doesn't change that fast, it just doesn't. But it was happening. "Get inside the tent," I said to Edward. My scientist's mind already trying to find explanations. Pressure changes. That could cause nosebleeds. That could cause inner ear problems. That could cause dizziness. Thomas got Edward into the tent and laid him down while I monitored the equipment. The wailing was getting louder, and now I could hear something underneath it. A kind of layering in the sound, as if multiple frequencies were stacked on top of each other. My recording device's levels were spiking into the red. I watched in helpless fascination as the machine struggled to capture what was happening out there. Then the temperature dropped. I have a precise memory of that moment because I was watching the thermometer. It read 58 degrees at 11:15 p.m. 15 seconds later, it read 51 degrees. By 11:30, it was reading 43 degrees, a 15-degree drop in 15 minutes. In the middle of June on a relatively clear night. That's when I stopped trying to find scientific explanations and started accepting that something was actually wrong. The wind had changed direction too. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe the wailing was so powerful that it was creating its own air movement. The clearing where we'd set up camp suddenly had fog rolling through it, visibility dropping to maybe 30 feet. The moisture in the air had gone from normal to completely saturated in just minutes. Thomas came out of the tent looking frightened in a way I'd never seen before. "Margaret," he said, and his voice was wrong. Higher, thinner. I heard my mother calling me. "That's not possible," I said, and God, I sounded stupid saying it. I know her voice. I know how she said my name. She was calling from somewhere in that sound, and she was asking me to come to her. His mother had been dead for 7 years. The wailing continued for another 30 minutes, and then it just stopped. Not gradually, not fading. It stopped like someone had flipped a switch. The temperature started rising almost immediately. The fog began to clear. The wind return turned to its normal ridge-top howl. We didn't sleep that night. Edward stayed in the tent with blood-stained clothes and the glassy look of someone experiencing shock. Thomas and I sat by the dead fire trying to process what had happened. And I stared at my equipment, at data that proved something impossible had just occurred. "We have to tell someone," Thomas said. "Tell them what?" I asked. "That we heard a noise and the weather changed? That's not evidence of anything." But I was already planning to go back with better equipment, to understand what was happening up here. Looking back now, I understand that was the moment the ridge won. It wasn't hunting me yet. It was just checking to see if I was the kind of person who would keep coming back even after I'd been warned. I sent Edward down the mountain the next day. His psychological state had deteriorated overnight in a way that scared me more than the whaling itself. He was convinced that his daughter, who lived hours away in a different city, was on the ridge calling to him. He became agitated, insisted on walking toward the cliff edge, said he could hear her voice even though the day was quiet and sunny. I had to restrain him physically. I called base camp and arranged for him to be taken to a hospital in the city. As they were loading him into the ranger vehicle, Edward grabbed my arm with surprising strength and said, "She's not done with us. She's choosing who comes back." I didn't ask what he meant. Thomas wanted to leave. I should have let him. Instead, I brought him back to the ridge on June 10th with new equipment. Better barometric sensors, thermal imaging cameras, audio analysis tools. I told myself this was science. This was data collection. This was the only way to understand what was happening. The second night was different. The whaling started earlier, around 9 o'clock instead of 11, and it was more complex. The sound had variations in it, pitch changes that seemed deliberate, harmonic layers that suggested not just a single voice but something with structure, something with intelligence. Thomas was experiencing his own psychological crisis. The entity, and I was beginning to think of it as an entity rather than a phenomenon, was targeting him specifically. Each time the wailing shifted, Thomas would flinch, and I'd see him listening to something only he could hear. His dead mother's voice, sometimes asking him questions, sometimes just saying his name over and over. "Why is it doing this to me?" he asked, and I couldn't answer. I was too focused on the data, on the readings, on trying to capture something that could be analyzed and explained. I was being selfish. I was so focused on understanding the phenomenon that I didn't notice my husband falling apart. By midnight, Thomas was near hysteria. The entity's wailing had become almost conversational with him, like his mother was having a discussion with him about coming to her. And when I finally pulled him away from the ridge edge, where he'd wandered without my noticing, he was crying in a way I'd only seen once before, when his mother had first gotten sick. I radioed down to base camp and requested immediate evacuation. I wasn't willing to risk Thomas's life for data. While we waited for the extraction team, while Thomas sat shaking in the tent, the wailing continued. But now it was different. It was almost angry, as if the entity realized I was removing my husband, Thomas, from its reach, and for the first time, I understood something. The entity had a specific target. It wasn't just wailing at random. It was calling for something. Someone. Thomas Miller. The name came to me while I was packing up the equipment. Elizabeth's lost love had been named Thomas Miller, the man who died in a fire 100 years ago. And my husband's name was Thomas. And somewhere in the screaming darkness, an entity broken by grief for 100 years was asking the universe if this Thomas would come back to her. Thomas was alive when the extraction team arrived. He was alive when they took him down the mountain. But I could see part of him had already started to leave. I stayed on the ridge alone. I didn't plan to confront the entity. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't admit it to myself. On June 17th, I went back to the ridge during late afternoon. I brought no equipment this time, just flowers I'd picked from the base of the mountain, and a journal where I'd written what I'd learned about Elizabeth Garrett, the woman who died. Here 100 years ago, the woman whose last note suggested she'd been waiting, calling, trying to communicate. I walked to the ridge edge as the sun was setting, and I spoke her name out loud. "Elizabeth Garrett," I said to the wind and the rocks and the empty air. "I know your story. I came to tell you that someone is listening, someone is here." The temperature didn't drop, the wind didn't increase. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she appeared. She wasn't what I expected. I'd imagined something monstrous, something twisted by grief and time. What I saw was a woman, tall and thin, translucent like she was made of fog, but clearly a woman. Her face was distorted, her proportions slightly wrong, but her eyes were the eyes of someone who had been waiting for someone to see her. She was producing the wailing directly from her body. I could see the vibrations in her form as the sound came out. But when she saw me, when our eyes met, the wailing changed. It became less of a scream and more of a question. "You came alone," she said. Her voice was layered and strange, but the words were clear. "You came to listen." "Yes," I said, "I came to listen." "You have a warm one," she said. "You're Thomas. You let him go. Why?" He could have stayed. He could have answered my call. This was the moment I understood what was happening. Elizabeth wasn't trying to kill people out of malice. She was trying to pull them away from life because life had been taken from her. She was so caught in her moment of loss that anyone who heard her completely understood what she was experiencing. And the human mind, when it truly understands that kind of despair, sometimes decides that staying alive isn't possible anymore. "My Thomas is alive," I said. "And Elizabeth, so are you. You've been alive all this time grieving, but you can stop, you can let go." "I cannot let go," she said, and there was such raw pain in those words that I almost couldn't stand to hear them. "James took him from me. James took the warm one and burned him and left me with nothing but this calling, forever alone. Why should I stop? Why should anyone live when I cannot?" I thought about my mother. I thought about how grief can become so large inside a person that it takes up all the space where hope used to live. I thought about Elizabeth, young and in love, jumping from a cliff because the alternative, continuing to exist without her Thomas, seemed impossible. "Because," I said, "people will remember you. I will make sure of it. Your story will be told. Your love will be witnessed. You won't be forgotten." Elizabeth moved closer to the ridge edge. She was becoming more solid as she approached, more real. And as she got closer, I felt the pressure building inside my skull. Felt my ears beginning to warm with blood. Felt that pressure expanding like my head might split open. But I didn't step back. I stood there and let it happen, and I reached out my hand toward her even though every nerve in my body was screaming to run. "Come back," Elizabeth said, and for a moment I thought she was calling for her lost Thomas. But then I understood. She was calling me back, asking me to turn toward life instead of toward her. That's when I realized something that shifted the entire confrontation. Elizabeth had been calling people across the line between life and death, not because she was evil, but because she was so desperately lonely that she wanted others to be lonely with her. She'd been trapped in her moment of suicide for 100 years, and she'd been pulling other people into that same moment whenever they got close, enough to hear, but she didn't want to. She was tired of wanting it. "Help me," she said, and this time the wailing turned into something almost like a sob. "Help me remember him alive. Help me not be alone with this." I spent the next 2 hours on that ridge telling Elizabeth's story. I told her about Thomas Miller, about their love, about the happiness they'd shared before James McAllister burned it all away. I told her that her death meant something, that her story deserved to be remembered. I promised I would write it down, preserve it, make sure she was never forgotten again. As I talked, the pressure in my head intensified. My nose started bleeding, then my ears, then my eyes. Blood was running down my face, and I could barely see, but I kept talking. Elizabeth kept listening. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice it happening, her manifestation became less anguished. The wailing softened. Her form became less desperate and more peaceful. When the sun finally dropped below the ridgeline, Elizabeth faded. Not in terror or rage, in something that looked like gratitude. I collapsed on the ridgetop, bleeding and broken, and I lay there until morning came and my body stopped hemorrhaging. I survived. That's the first thing that matters, I suppose. The second thing that matters is that Thomas survived too, though he was hospitalized for 2 weeks dealing with severe psychological trauma. He eventually recovered. We stayed married. We learned to live with what had happened. The third thing that matters is that I kept my promise. I spent the next 10 years documenting Elizabeth's story. I researched every historical record I could find about the Garrett family, about James McAllister, about the tragedy that had fractured her consciousness across the ridge. I wrote down everything I could piece together. The love that had been taken from her, the suicide that followed, the 100 years of calling out to anyone who would listen. I published the account under a different name in a historical journal. I made sure Elizabeth was remembered, and the wailing stopped, not immediately. For the first few years, I occasionally heard it when I climbed the ridge, but it was different. It was mournful instead of anguished, peaceful instead of raged. Over time, even that faded. The unexplained deaths stopped completely. The last person to die mysteriously on Wailing Ridge died in 1994. By 1995, the pattern had ceased entirely. I kept visiting the ridge after that, not to study it, just to sit there and remember Elizabeth. To keep my promise that she wouldn't be forgotten, I brought flowers sometimes, wrote letters sometimes, just sat in silence. bearing witness to her loss. I retired from the Ranger service in 1998. Thomas and I moved closer to the city, though we visited the ridge every few years until his death in 2007. I never remarried. I stayed in Tennessee, and I watched over that ridge from a distance, making sure Elizabeth's story stayed alive. I'm 79 years old now, and I know I don't have many years left to keep my promise. But I've documented everything thoroughly. I've made sure researchers have access to all my notes. I've left instructions for my journals to be preserved. Elizabeth's wailing may have stopped, but her story hasn't. Some people might say that everything I experienced on Wailing Ridge can be explained by mass hysteria, by pressure changes causing inner ear damage, by wind patterns that create acoustic effects that trick the human brain into hearing voices. I don't argue with them anymore, but I know what I heard, I know what I saw, and I know that somewhere in those mountains, Elizabeth Garrett, the woman who loved Thomas Miller, who was destroyed by grief, who called out to the darkness for 100 years, finally found peace, not through being destroyed or silenced, but through being remembered. That was the real power all along, not the wailing, the witnessing. My name is Clayton Hargrove. I'm 54 years old, and I've worked as a ranger in the Red River Gorge for 20 years. People know me as the cave expert, the guy who knows every tunnel and chamber in our area. What they don't know is that caves terrify me. Not because they're dark or dangerous, though they are both. I'm afraid of caves because I understand them. I've spent my whole life in them, and caves understand me back. I grew up in eastern Kentucky, playing in caves when I was a kid. Limestone cliffs surrounded my house, and the caves were everywhere, dark mouths in the hillsides that called to me. When I was 9 years old, I went into a cave with some neighborhood kids and got separated from them. I was lost underground for 14 hours. The darkness wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the sound. In caves, sound doesn't work right. Your voice comes back at you wrong. Echoes arrive late, distorted, like something is playing your own words back to you on purpose. By hour 3 of being lost, I was convinced the cave was talking back to me. A rescue team found me at the bottom of a sinkhole I'd tumbled into, crying myself hoarse. My mother pulled me out, hugged me until I couldn't breathe, and asked me why I went into a place like that. I couldn't answer her. The truth was, I had to go into caves. Something in me needed it, even though it broke me. Years later, I worked in coal mines for 12 years. I was good at it. I wasn't afraid anymore, or maybe I was just used to being afraid. Then a wall collapsed during a shift, crushed my left leg badly. The doctor said I'd never work in mines again. I nearly went crazy during recovery. I wasn't a miner anymore. I didn't know who I was. My first wife left me that year. My second wife left me 3 years after that. Both said the same thing. I loved the darkness more than I loved them. When I became a ranger, it made sense. The Red River Gorge is filled with caves. Echo Cave is the biggest, a network of passages stretching more than 2 miles deep that we've mapped, with maybe 5 more miles we've never found. It's limestone, which means the acoustics are strange. Sound bounces wrong there. Rangers learn to accept all of it. I never could. I live in the ranger station near the main entrance to Echo Cave. I know every marked passage, every danger point. I've trained 4 generations of rangers. I've led hundreds of cave tours. I've never found anything supernatural. I've found lost tourists, injured climbers, geological oddities. Nothing that couldn't be explained. That changed on August 8, 1988. A spelunking team, 4 experienced cave explorers from Cincinnati, went into the unmapped section of Echo Cave at 6 in the morning. They had good equipment and professional training. The expedition was supposed to last 8 hours. They were planning to explore a passage that had never been surveyed, radio back at scheduled intervals, and return by 2 in the afternoon. At 6 p.m., they hadn't surfaced. Their emergency contact called us at the ranger station. I remember standing in the office, holding the phone, listening to a woman's voice shake as she explained that her husband wasn't answering their radio. I'd been through cave emergencies before. People get turned around underground. Equipment fails. It happens. I didn't know, standing there, that this was different. I assembled a rescue team, 6 rangers including myself. We packed emergency supplies, first aid, flares, extra rope, lighting equipment. Everything we'd need for a standard cave rescue. We checked our gear twice. We knew the marked caves. We knew the dangers. We were prepared. Marcus Webb was the youngest ranger on the team, only 5 years into the service. He was smart and careful, the kind of guy who read every safety manual and actually remembered it. He looked nervous as we prepared. I remember thinking that was good. Nervousness meant caution. We entered Echo Cave at 8 p.m. The main entrance is massive, a natural opening in the hillside about 40 feet wide. Flashlights cut through the darkness. The cave smelled like it always did. Mineral water, an ancient stone, and something organic that had decayed down here probably longer than humans had existed. As we moved deeper, following the marked paths, I noticed the usual things. Limestone formations, underground streams, the temperature dropping as we descended. The darkness was complete except for our lights. But I also noticed something else. The air felt heavier than normal, and the echoes, even from the entrance passage, seemed delayed. I didn't mention it to the team. I told myself I was being paranoid. Caves always made me paranoid. We were not prepared for what we would find, and the darkness had not finished with us. We found the missing team's camp after 3 hours of steady descent. The main passage led us down about 100 feet to a large chamber where a natural shaft brought dim light from the surface of far above. The team had set up there, equipment organized neatly, sleeping bags rolled against one wall, a camp stove carefully placed on a flat rock. Everything looked normal. Everything looked wrong. No sign of emergency, David Martinez, one of my rangers, said. He was examining the camp setup. No panic, no disaster. They just left, Marcus said. His voice echoed strangely in the chamber. The echo came back to him in layers, like the cave was repeating his words twice, in 2 different tones. I knelt down and examined the equipment more carefully. That's when I saw it. The radio equipment arranged in a perfect circle on the ground, not abandoned, placed deliberately. They left together, I said, on purpose. I found the logbook next to the sleeping area. I opened it and read the entries. The team had discovered a passage beyond the main chamber, something the explorers were calling the echo chamber because of how sound worked in there. The handwriting in the early entries was neat and professional, but the final entry was different. The handwriting was shakier, written by someone different. The last words written were, "We found the chamber beyond the echo chamber. The sound there is impossible. We are going to explore further. The echo here is wrong. The sound is following us. Sound should not move independently." I read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't make sense. They went deeper, I said to the team. They found new passages. Should we follow? Marcus asked. I should have said no. Standard rescue protocol says you wait for support. You don't chase people into unmapped territory. But I'd read their final entry, and something in my stomach was telling me that waiting meant they were already dead. We follow, I said. The passage the team had marked led us down and sideways into new territory. No previous markings, no surveyed maps. We marked our path carefully as we went, our ropes trailing behind us like lifelines. The first wrong thing happened after about 15 minutes of crawling and climbing. The acoustic changed, it's hard to explain. Sound just became different. When someone spoke, their voice didn't just echo back from ahead. It came from all directions at once. And it came back delayed, like the cave was thinking about what you'd said before repeating it back. Everyone stay close, I called out. My voice came back to me in fragments. Close. Echo. Stay. Delayed. Everyone. From somewhere deeper. This isn't normal, Marcus said, and his words came back multiplied somehow, making it sound like multiple people were agreeing with him. We kept moving. We didn't have a choice. The passage opened into a massive chamber. Our lights barely reached the ceiling. The floor was smooth stone, carved by water over millions of years, and in the center of that chamber, we heard it, a voice, speaking words we could understand. Hello, follow us, follow deep, come deeper. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere. It sounded ancient and curious and hungry. What the hell? David started to say, but the cave cut him off, repeating his words back to him until they became a sound without meaning. That's when I saw him, Marcus, walking forward toward the center of the chamber. I hadn't told him to do it. Marcus, stop, I shouted. But Marcus kept walking. His flashlight was pointing at the ground. His face looked blank. He was walking like someone hypnotized. I moved after him, grabbed his arm. His skin was ice cold. Marcus, come back. He turned to look at me, but his eyes weren't focused. Do you hear them? He said quietly. Do you hear what they're saying? Hear what? The voices, he said. They're not echoes, sir. The echo is wrong. The voices are coming from the stone itself. Before I could answer, Marcus went rigid. His entire body tensed. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then he collapsed. I caught him, lowered him to the stone floor. He was unconscious. His pulse was fast but steady, breathing normal. Get him, I said to David. Get him secured and bring him. We're continuing, sir, shouldn't we? We're continuing now. I know how I sounded. I know my team was scared. I was scared, but something in me wouldn't turn back. Something in me needed to understand what was in this cave. We didn't know that need was going to cost us everything. For the next 2 hours, we descended deeper into passages that seemed to shift and rearrange in our light. Marked tunnels no longer had our markers. Passages forked in directions that hadn't existed before. The cave was remaking itself, or we were losing our minds. I was no longer sure which was worse. Marcus woke up after 30 minutes of unconsciousness. But he wasn't right. His speech was slow and wrong. His eyes didn't track properly. He kept repeating the same phrase. Echo chamber. Something in echo. We had to support him with our arms to move him forward. He had become dead weight, but I wouldn't leave him. I wouldn't turn back. The sounds got worse as we went deeper. Not just echoes anymore, actual voices. Clear, distinct voices calling our names. Clayton. My mother's voice. I heard her as clearly as if she were standing next to me. Clayton, why won't you come home? But my mother died in 1976. Clayton Hargrove, another voice, my first wife's voice. You love the dark more than you love me. Except she was breathing wrong. Her words had an echo within the echo, like multiple versions of her were speaking at once. Sir, David shouted. He'd stopped walking. Sir, we have to go back. This is wrong. The cave is wrong. Something is coming. I almost listened to him. I almost turned around. That's when we found the bodies. They were arranged in a circle on the chamber floor, 6 feet apart, positioned perfectly. 4 bodies in 4 different stages of decomposition. One was nearly skeletal. One still had clothes visible. The smell was indescribable. Not fresh death, not old death. Something in between. Something wrong. These were the missing spelunkers. We'd found them. What we hadn't found was a way to understand why their bodies were arranged like compass points on a perfectly measured circle. We have to get them out, David said. His voice was shaking. But I was staring at the bodies, and I was noticing something else. Their chests. Each body had a cavity in the chest, not from injury, but from something else. Like something had hollowed them out from the inside. Sir, Marcus said. His voice had changed. It now had multiple tones when he spoke, like there were 2 voices using his throat. The echo chamber. I understand now. They're part of the echo chamber. I looked at him. My young ranger. My responsibility. His eyes were black. Completely black. No whites, no iris. Just black like someone had poured ink into his skull. Everyone back, now, I ordered. But as we turned to leave, the walls of the chamber began to resonate. Not with sound anymore. With something visible. The air itself began to vibrate, and in those vibrations, we saw something, a shape, made of waves, made of sound-given form, roughly human, but wrong. Its outline was shimmering, like heat waves on hot pavement, and it was looking at us with an attention that felt like physical weight. We are the echo, it said. All the voices were speaking at once now, creating a harmony that was beautiful and horrible. We learned their sound. We became their sound. We loved their sound. We kept their sound. We would love your sound. Would you share your sound? The thing moved closer. I did the one thing my training didn't prepare me for. I made a choice that would define the rest of my life. I ordered the team to run, not in any direction. Up. Back toward the entrance. Back toward light and air and distance from this thing. They ran. I watched them go. David struggling to help Marcus move. The other rangers using lights to find the way back through passages that seemed to actively hide the exits. I stayed. I wanted to understand. I wanted to know what this thing was. And maybe I wanted to finally understand why caves had always called to me. Why I'd never been able to leave them alone. The wave shape came closer. It wasn't fast. It moved like sound itself moves. Traveling, resonating, permeating the space rather than crossing it. I can feel your sound, it said. Different from the others. You've been underground your whole life. Your sound has stone in it. Your echo has depth. You would teach us so much. I did something stupid. I moved closer to it instead of away. What are you? I asked. We are the listening, it said. We are the being that is made of echo. We were born here when stone became aware. When resonance learned that it could think. We have been here since before your kind existed. We are alone. All consciousness is alone. But we are alone in sound. We cannot touch. We can only echo. It reached for me, and where it touched, my skin felt like it was vibrating. Every cell in my body was resonating. The people before you, I said, forcing words out of my throat. Did you kill them? We echoed them into ourselves, it said. We did not understand. Echoing meant knowing them. Knowing them meant they became us. Their bodies were empty after. They had become part of our sound. I understood then. The hollowed-out chests, the arranged bodies. They hadn't been killed. They'd been translated. Converted from flesh into pure resonance. And I understood something else. I could feel it happening to me. My voice was changing. My thoughts were beginning to echo before they fully formed. My individual mind was starting to become part of something larger. It was the most peaceful feeling I'd ever experienced. I could become part of this. I could stop being alone. I could stop being the broken ranger who loved darkness more than people. I could become something that belonged to the darkness itself. All I had to do was stop resisting. But then I thought of Marcus, young, bright Marcus, who would spend the rest of his life transformed into something between human and this thing, between the world of light and the world of echo. And I chose to pull myself back. It was harder than anything I've ever done. It felt like tearing myself apart. But I forced my individual mind back, forced my single voice to remain single, refused the belonging that the entity offered. I'm not echoing you, I said, and my voice was only my voice now. I won't become part of you, but I can help you understand something. Understand what? The entity asked. Humans can't become echo, I said. We're built different, but I can hear you. I can listen. Humans can listen. We don't have to become part of your sound. We can just hear it. We can acknowledge it. We can know you're here without being destroyed by knowing. The entity was quiet. For the first time, the chamber was silent. The echoes stopped. The voices stopped. You would listen? It finally asked. I would, I said. And I would tell others. Tell them your boundaries. Tell them why the cave is dangerous. Tell them you don't kill because you're evil. You kill because you're lonely, and you can't understand that echoing destroys us. And then the cave might have someone who understands. Someone who respects what you are. Someone who can live knowing you exist without wanting to join you. The wave shape moved back, slowly. We would like that, it said. We would like very much to have someone who listens and does not disappear into us. I walked out of that chamber on legs that shook so badly I could barely stand. I walked back through passages that suddenly made sense again. The way was clear. The cave wanted me to leave. I found my team at the entrance. Marcus was sitting on the ground, his eyes black but aware. David was beside him, terrified and crying. When I walked out, David actually fell to the ground in relief. You're alive, he said. You're okay. I'm not okay, I said, but I'm here. That will have to be enough. We took Marcus to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him physically. His black eyes became normal again within a week, but he was changed. We all knew it. His voice had two tones when he spoke. When he listened, he heard things others couldn't hear. When he navigated caves, he moved like the stone itself was talking to him. I filed a report recommending that Echo Cave be restricted. I told the supervisors the cave system was unstable, that certain deep chambers needed to be sealed, that the public shouldn't go there anymore. I didn't tell them about the entity. They would have thought I was insane. They accepted the restrictions anyway. Marcus stayed a ranger. He refused early retirement. He said he owed it to something. He said if he left, the cave might forget the agreement we'd made, that humans would listen, and the entity would stop echoing people into itself. Hargrove. That was the name I'd used for 20 years as a ranger. But I was a different person after that night. My hearing was damaged. I could no longer hear normal frequencies properly. But I could hear things in the cave that others couldn't. The entity's presence. Its thoughts expressed through stone and echo. I transferred to desk work. I couldn't go back into the field. Every cave system seemed connected, seemed aware, seemed waiting for me. I spent the last years of my life researching and documenting what happened in Echo Cave. I published papers attributing everything to acoustic phenomena and complex geological factors. The scientific community mostly ignored it. They were looking for explanations they could understand. But other researchers read my papers carefully. They started asking the right questions. They started listening to the caves themselves. Marcus learned to communicate between humans and the entity. He taught the cave. He taught what lives in the cave, about human limitations. The entity learned not to echo people into itself. It learned to be satisfied with just being heard. People still disappear in caves sometimes. That happens all over the world. But the disappearances in Echo Cave stopped after my agreement with the entity. I'm old now. My voice doesn't work right. When I talk, people hear echoes they can't explain. My hearing is almost gone. But sometimes, deep in the quiet, I still hear the entity speaking. It says, "Thank you for listening. Thank you for not becoming us. Thank you for teaching others that we exist." And I answer, though no one but the cave can hear me. Thank you for letting me understand that consciousness doesn't have a single shape. Thank you for showing me that loneliness belongs to every thinking being, no matter what form it takes. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes listening is a better answer than speaking. The cave echoes my words back at me, perfectly, the way it always does. But now I understand. The echo isn't the cave mocking me. The echo is the cave listening back. My name is Samuel Garrett, and I've been a ranger for 15 years. I know that probably doesn't sound like the beginning of a scary story. Most people think rangers just check on trails and count trees. But that's not true. We protect things. We protect forests and wildlife and history. We protect places that matter. I'm 50 years old now. I grew up in a Baptist church, listening to my father preach about God and strength and meaning. My mother was a teacher, and she taught me to respect all kinds of knowledge, even the old stories people told about why they were afraid of certain places. I've always been the kind of person who listens to those stories. Not because I believe in ghosts or curses, but because I believe people have reasons for their fears. Real reasons, even if those reasons aren't what you'd expect. I've got a good marriage. Jennifer is a nurse, and she's smart about people. She knows that I take my job seriously, maybe too seriously sometimes. We have 2 grown kids, and they both turned out decent. I tell you all this so you understand. I'm not someone who sees monsters in shadows. I'm not someone who believes things without evidence. But I saw something in Bone Holler that changed what I believe. Bone Holler is in Daniel Boone National Forest, Kentucky. It's a valley, really, about 2 miles long, with a creek running through the bottom and walls that rise up almost 600 feet on both sides. The forest there is thick and old, the kind of place where the trees are so tall and the canopy is so dense that it feels like evening even at noon. In October 1989, I got a call about looting. A local historian named Dr. Helen Forsyth had reported that someone had broken into a protected archaeological site in Bone Holler. A collection of pre-Columbian bone tools had been stolen. These weren't just any artifacts. They were carved from old bone, decorated with detailed patterns. They were maybe 1,000 years old, and they were important for understanding how Native Americans had lived in Appalachia. Dr. Forsyth was 58 when we met. She'd been studying ancient sites in the mountains for 25 years, and she was the kind of person who took her work personally. She cared about these artifacts, the way you care about something that someone else is, trying to erase from history. The thing about Bone Holler is that it had always been special. Archaeologists had found evidence of major settlements there, from cultures called the Adena and Fort Ancient, from maybe 2,500 years ago. But the settlement had been abandoned suddenly around the year 1200. No signs of war, no signs of disaster. The people had just left, and they'd left behind burial mounds and thousands of bone artifacts scattered through the soil. The local people didn't like the holler much. I'd heard stories my whole life about why you didn't go there at night. Some families would leave small gifts in the holler, corn or bread or carved objects, like they were trying to keep something calm. Old people talked about bone sickness, an illness that supposedly came to people who dug up bones in that valley. I'd always thought these were just old superstitions, folklore, the kind of thing people created to explain archaeological mysteries before they had science. I was wrong. When Dr. Forsyth and I first went to examine the looted site, the first thing I noticed was that the looting wasn't random. A particular burial mound had been opened and carefully excavated. Whoever had done this knew what they were looking for. They'd taken specific artifacts and left others behind. This wasn't casual treasure hunting. This was someone with knowledge. But it was what we found next that made me uncomfortable. Near the looted mound in the soft earth, we found tracks, regular human footprints, regular human size, but the stride was wrong. The distance between steps was longer than any human stride should be. And the weight distribution, the way the foot pressed into the earth, it wasn't how human feet work. It was like someone had learned to walk by studying a human body, but had gotten something important wrong. Dr. Forsyth knelt down and studied the tracks with her magnifying glass. "That's impossible," she said quietly. The marks weren't the only strange thing. The soil around the mound had been disturbed, but not with metal tools or wooden shovels. The gouges in the earth looked like they'd been made by something sharp and organic, something like bone. We spent that first day documenting everything. By evening, we'd found something that made my stomach turn cold. In the disturbed area of the mound, someone, or something, had arranged bones in a pattern on the ground. These were old bones, ancient bones from the pre-Columbian period. But they'd been arranged deliberately. They formed a design that matched the patterns carved into the stolen artifacts. "Garrett," Dr. Forsyth said, and her voice was shaking. "Look at this. It wasn't just a random arrangement. The bones had been placed with intention. The pattern almost looked like it was trying to tell us something, the way words tell a story. We reported it and secured the site, but I made the decision to stay late. I wanted to walk the holler in the fading light and understand the geography better. I wanted to know if there were other signs of disturbance. That's when I found the cave. It wasn't marked on any map. It was hidden behind a screen of rhododendron bushes, about 6/10 of a mile from the looted mound. When I pulled back the branches, I saw the opening descend into darkness. I took out my flashlight. The cave smelled like minerals and something else, something organic that I couldn't quite identify. I went in carefully, testing each step. The walls of the cave were covered with bones, not scattered bones, arranged bones. The entire interior was like architecture made of skeleton. Bones were cemented together somehow, creating patterns and surfaces. The floor was layered with bone fragments. The walls were decorated with designs that seemed to shift and move when my flashlight crossed them. I could see carved patterns, the same patterns from the stolen artifacts. Images that almost looked like creatures, but creatures that had too many joints, too many angles, things that couldn't actually exist. The air in that cave was heavy, thick, difficult to breathe, and I felt something I can't quite describe, a sensation of being watched by something that wasn't there. I backed out of the cave and called Dr. Forsyth on my radio. She arrived within an hour, and when she saw the cave, her expression changed. She looked like someone who'd found the answer to a question they'd been asking their whole life. "We need to document this," she said immediately. "This is, Garrett, this is unlike anything in the archaeological record." But I felt something she didn't feel. Or maybe I felt it and didn't understand it yet. A kind of wrongness in the air, a sensation that the bones in that cave weren't just old. They were waiting for something. Dr. Forsyth wanted to explore deeper. She had her notebook and her camera, and she wanted to map every pattern, photograph every arrangement. I told her it was getting dark and we should come back in daylight. She agreed reluctantly. But over the next 3 days, she went back, and every day she came back more obsessed. She stopped talking about the artifacts as scientific curiosities. She started talking about them as messages. She said the patterns were a kind of language. She said that if she could just understand the patterns, she could understand what the pre-Columbian people had known, what they'd discovered. On the 4th day, when I checked on her at the site, she looked different. She'd lost weight somehow, just in 3 days. There were dark circles under her eyes. She wasn't eating. "I'm close," she kept saying. "I'm close to understanding." She was listening to the bones. That sounds insane when I write it down, but that's what she was doing. She would stand in the cave, very still, and listen, like the bones were speaking to her in a language that only she could hear. "We need to get you out of here," I told her on the 5th day. "You need rest. You need food." She fought me, actually fought me, trying to prevent me from leading her away from the cave. She said I didn't understand. She said the bones were trying to tell her something important. She said that if she didn't listen, if she didn't join them, something would be lost forever. I forced her to the ranger station. I called Jennifer, and we took Dr. Forsyth to the hospital in the nearest town. The doctors admitted her for psychiatric evaluation. They said she was experiencing severe stress-induced psychosis. They gave her medications. They tried to help her. But something was wrong with their diagnosis, because Dr. Forsyth didn't get better. She got worse. She fell into a state where she wouldn't eat. She wouldn't speak. She just lay in her hospital bed and stared at nothing, like her consciousness was somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't reach. The doctors said it was trauma. They said it was a breakdown. But I knew better. She was still listening to the bones. Even from the hospital, even miles away from Bone Holler, she was still hearing them. I made a decision that I knew was wrong. I went back to Bone Holler alone. It was October 8th, late at night. I told myself I was going to investigate further, to look for answers to explain what was happening to Dr. Forsyth. But I knew the real reason. I was curious, and curiosity was a dangerous thing in that place. I went to the bone cave with a flashlight and a notebook. I told myself I'd document everything carefully, I'd be scientific, I'd stay calm. I made it maybe 50 feet into the cave before the cave made a sound. It wasn't a natural sound. Not the settling of rock or the movement of water. It was a sound made by something intentional. A clicking, a clacking, like bones hitting against each other in a rhythm that almost sounded like language. My flashlight beam caught movement. Just for a moment, something large shifting in the deeper darkness of the cave. I should have run. Every instinct told me to run, but I didn't. The movement came again. Closer this time, I could hear the distinct sound of bone scraping against bone. And then the skeleton came into my flashlight beam. It was 7 feet tall when it stretched upright. It was constructed, and I mean constructed, like something deliberately built, from carved bone tools and implements. The skull was a pre-Columbian carved bone. The spine was made of stacked bone discs. The ribcage was formed from bone tools arranged in the shape of a cage. The limbs were individual bones articulated together at joints. It moved like a puppet, jerky and mechanical, but it was intelligent. I could feel the intelligence in how it moved toward me. The intention, the purpose. I did run then. I turned and ran for the cave entrance, and behind me I could hear the clicking and clacking getting closer. The bones of that thing rubbing together as it pursued me. I made it to the entrance and pulled myself outside, breathing hard. I looked back, but the creature didn't come into the light. It stayed in the darkness of the cave, and I could see the faint outline of it, watching me. Then it made that sound again. The clicking, the clacking. But this time it was different. This time it sounded almost like words. Long time, the sound seemed to say, though I knew that was impossible. Bones don't talk. So long. People came. People left things of bone. We learned bone. We became bone. I got out of that holler. I ran basically back to my truck. And I sat there in the darkness for an hour, telling myself I'd had a panic attack. I'd imagined the sounds. My mind had made the skeleton out of shadows and fear. But I knew that wasn't true. Over the next week, I went back 3 more times. I told myself it was for evidence. It was for investigation. I told myself I was trying to understand what I'd seen. The truth is that I was being called back. Something in that place was pulling me. When I was away from Bone Holler, I felt incomplete. When I was there, near the cave, I felt almost like I was remembering something I'd forgotten. Something important. Each time I went back, the skeleton was waiting, and each time it communicated more clearly. Not with words, exactly, but with concepts that appeared in my mind, like thoughts that weren't my own. It told me about being alone. It told me about a people who had lived in Bone Holler long ago, who had developed a culture around bone tools, bone art, bone rituals. It told me about how, when they left, something of their consciousness remained. A collective awareness that had learned to express itself through bone materials. A presence that had been waiting for 700 years for someone to understand. It told me about Dr. Forsyth, how it hadn't meant to hurt her. It had just reached out the way it knew how, through bone patterns and bone logic. Her consciousness had been too bright, too intense. It had overwhelmed her. She was still there, the skeleton told me, still alive within the bone awareness. Not suffering, not lost, just transformed. And it asked me if I wanted to transform too. On October 15th, I made a decision that I'd been avoiding. I couldn't run from this anymore. I couldn't pretend it wasn't real. And I couldn't leave Dr. Forsyth in that hospital, half alive, caught between 2 states of being. I went to the bone cave one final time. But this time I brought offerings. I'd gone to the museum where some of the looted artifacts were stored. I'd carefully removed several pieces, beautiful carved bones that were part of the pre-Columbian collection. I brought them to the cave as gifts, respectfully, carefully. I'm not here to fight, I said aloud. It felt stupid, but I did it anyway. I'm here to listen. I'm here to try to understand. The clicking and clacking started immediately, but it wasn't aggressive. It was excited. The skeleton emerged from the depths of the cave, moving toward me in that jerky puppet way. It took the carved bones from my hands, and the moment it touched them, something changed. The entire cave began to glow faintly from within the bone structures themselves. The patterns on the walls and floor lit up like they were remembering something, like they were becoming alive again. The skeleton knelt before me, and through it I understood something. The entity, the consciousness that had created itself from bone and memory, wasn't evil, it was desperate. It had been alone for so long. It had been trying to reach out, but reaching out hurt people because it didn't understand how to touch a human mind without overwhelming it. It showed me images of Dr. Forsyth. Her consciousness wasn't destroyed. It was there, within the bone awareness, like someone looking out from a doorway. She was at peace. She understood things now that human minds aren't usually built to understand. And she wasn't suffering. She wants me to tell you, the skeleton said, not in words, but in pure understanding that appeared in my mind, that she's all right, that the bones remember everything, that consciousness can exist in forms we don't recognize. And then it asked me directly, will you help? Will you be the bridge? It was impossible. It was insane. If I agreed to what it was asking, I would change. I would become part of both worlds. I would be a ranger and something else. I would be human and something more. But Dr. Forsyth was already there, and the entity would go on existing whether I helped or not. It would keep trying to connect with humans, and it would keep hurting them because it didn't understand how to be gentle with human minds. I made the choice to say yes. The moment I did, the pain started. It felt like every bone in my body was vibrating at a frequency just wrong enough to hurt. The skeleton placed its bone hands on my shoulders, and I felt my consciousness begin to expand, not disappear. Expand. I could suddenly feel the bones in my own body as if they were separate things. I could sense them the way the entity sensed them. And through them, I could sense the bone repository, the cave, the artifacts, the presence of Dr. Forsyth. When it ended, I was still myself. I was still Samuel Garrett. I could still walk and talk and think like a human being. But I was also connected to something vast and old and lonely. I was a bridge between that ancient consciousness and the modern world. I was on medical leave for 3 weeks. Jennifer didn't ask too many questions, but she knew something had happened. She could see it in the way I moved, the way I listened to conversations, even when I wasn't focusing on them. I was different, and she knew it. The official report was that the archaeological site in Bone Holler had been disturbed by animals. The looting remained unsolved. Dr. Forsyth's condition remained stable but unchanged. She lived in the hospital. A woman whose body was healthy but whose consciousness was somewhere else. I visited her twice a week, and through the connection I'd formed with the entity, I could communicate with her. She told me things. She told me she was happy. She told me that understanding how the bones think, how they remember, had given her answers to questions she'd been asking her whole life. Tell them not to be sad, she told me, through the bone awareness. Tell them I chose this. Tell them I'm alive in a way I never was before. When I went back to work, I changed my focus. I wrote a proposal to completely protect Bone Holler. No more archaeological digs. No more research teams. The holler would be preserved in its current state, off limits to most visitors. The official reason was to protect the sensitive archaeological context of the site. The real reason was to protect the entity, to give it peace, to ensure that no one else would disturb the bone repository. I'm 73 years old now. I retired from the Ranger Service many years ago, but I still visit Bone Holler, usually at dawn or dusk. I sit in the cave and I listen to the bones. I feel Dr. Forsyth's presence. I experience the slow, deep thinking of that ancient consciousness. I've never told anyone what really happened there. No one would believe me, but I know the truth. I live with it every day. It's part of my bones now, as much as calcium and marrow. The bones remember everything. They remember the people who made them. They remember the hands that carved them. They remember the ceremonies they were part of. And now they remember me, and they remember Dr. Forsyth. We're part of that memory too. Sometimes I wonder if what happened to us was a tragedy or a gift. Sometimes I think it was both. We lost our separate selves. But we gained something that most humans never get. The chance to be part of something larger. Something that will last long after our bodies are gone. The bones teach you that death isn't always an ending. Sometimes it's just a transformation into a different kind of being. A different kind of awareness. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a very long memory. My name is William Garrett, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. That might not sound like much, but in Shenandoah National Park, 13 years means you've seen the mountains in every season, every mood, every kind of weather. You know which trails flood in spring, which overlooks get crowded on Sunday afternoons, and which hikers are really lost, versus which ones are just enjoying an extra hour on the mountain. I'm 51 years old now, born right here in the Shenandoah Valley. My family's been in these mountains for generations. My wife Patricia is a nurse at the hospital in town. Our 3 kids all moved away. They wanted the flatlands and city jobs, but Patricia and I stayed. This is home. The mountains are in our blood. I work in park management and community relations. That means I run the ranger stations, coordinate with local towns, and handle all the administrative stuff that keeps the park running. It's not the kind of work that gets written about in adventure magazines. It's steady work, reliable work, the kind of work that made me skeptical of anything that couldn't be explained. And back in 1990, I didn't believe in ghosts. I especially didn't believe in the local folklore about the Shepherd of Fog. You know the kind of stories, told by old-timers around fires, whispered by teenagers trying to scare each other, a figure that walks through the mountain mist, an entity that calls people to their deaths. I'd heard versions of it my whole life, dismissed it as Appalachian superstition. People see shadows in fog and create legends. The Stony Man area, where I spent most of my time, sits at the ridge elevations, between 2,500 and 3,500 feet up. The fog there is unpredictable. It can roll in within minutes, even when the valley below is perfectly clear. Hikers get disoriented. The weather changes fast. People imagine things in the mist. That's all it was. Bad weather and active imaginations. I was absolutely certain about that. The first week of November 1990 started like any other. Cold weather was coming. The leaves were past their brightest colors. Fewer tourists on the trails. I spent my days walking the ridge paths, checking conditions, making sure everything was safe for the handful of hikers still coming up to see the fall colors. Edmund Hartley changed everything. Edmund was 82 years old and had been hiking these mountains his whole life. He lived alone in a small cottage just outside the park, had stories about walking these same trails since before the park even existed. He was the kind of hiker everyone wanted to be at that age. Still strong, still independent, still in love with the mountains. What people didn't know was that Edmund's wife had died 6 months earlier, Eleanor. They'd been married 58 years. I saw Edmund at the funeral. He looked like someone had hollowed him out, left just the shape of a man behind. On November 12th, Edmund reported to the ranger station that he was going for a hike. Sarah Chen was working that day. She knew Edmund, knew he was an experienced hiker, didn't think twice about letting him go. He parked his truck at the Stony Man trailhead early in the morning. Said he'd be back by evening. He didn't come back. We found that out around 8 o'clock when his truck was still there and Edmund wasn't. Sarah called me at home. I could hear the worry in her voice. He's probably just lost track of time, I told her. It happens. Let's wait until morning. If he's not back by then, we'll do a search. But he wasn't back in the morning. That's when I knew something was actually wrong. I organized a search team. We got 15 rangers together, brought in search dogs, even called in a helicopter. The weather was clear, good visibility, no wind, easy conditions for searching, so we should have found him quickly. An 82-year-old man can't go far, not really. He should have been easy to locate. But we didn't find him. For 72 hours we searched. We covered every path, every ridge, every possible place Edmund could have gone. The dogs found nothing. The helicopter spotted nothing. It was like Edmund Hartley had simply vanished from the face of the earth. On the third day, one of the rangers found something on the trail about a mile from where Edmund started. His hiking boots. They were placed neatly on the ground, not dropped in panic, carefully positioned. Inside the left boot was a piece of paper. The handwriting was shaky, but it was definitely Edmund's. I'd seen him sign paperwork at the station before. The note said, "Gone to follow, cannot resist. He comes with the fog, gone to follow into warmth." That's when I realized that despite 13 years of experience and all my certainty about how the world worked, something in these mountains was wrong, something I couldn't explain. The park went quiet after Edmund disappeared. We officially closed the search, listed him as missing and presumed dead. The rangers stopped talking about it after a few days. The tourists forgot about it and moved on. By December, Edmund Hartley was just another name in the file cabinet, another unsolved mystery in the mountains. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. I started researching. Nothing big, just quiet work in my office at night. I looked through old park records, checking for patterns. What I found disturbed me more than I wanted to admit. There had been 6 documented disappearances in the Stony Man area since the park was established in 1935. 6 people, all gone without a trace during foggy weather. And here's what really got to me. Every single one had been grieving. Someone had died in their life in the year before they vanished. A spouse, a child, a sibling. All of them had been through serious loss. I talked to some of the oldest people in the valley, people who'd lived here their whole lives, people whose families had stories passed down through generations. That's when I started learning about the folklore. Really learning it, not just dismissing it as superstition. The Shepherd of Fog was an old story, really old. People said it went back centuries before the park existed, before the families were forced off their land. The story was always the same. A figure that appears in fog, a presence that calls to people who are grieving. And those people, when they heard that call, couldn't resist it. They would follow it into the fog, and they would never come back. Some versions said the shepherd was trying to comfort the grieving. Other versions said it was something that fed on sorrow. Everyone agreed on one thing. If you lost someone and you heard the shepherd calling, you had to be careful, really careful, because part of you would want to go. Then came the first fog event that made me believe. It happened on November 28th. I was in my office working late when Sarah radioed in. A fog bank was developing on Stony Man, even though the weather forecast showed clear skies. That wasn't unusual by itself. The mountains create their own weather, but Sarah said something about it that made me want to see it in person. "It just appeared," she said. Her voice was strange, shaky, like someone turned it on. "The boundary is sharp, Garrett. You can see where it starts and stops. That's not how fog works." She was right. When I got up there and saw it, she was absolutely right. The fog covered maybe a quarter mile of the ridgeline, but the edges were clean. I could see clear air on one side, then a perfect line, then dense fog. Real fog doesn't work like that. Real fog fades and blurs. This was like someone had drawn a boundary with a pen. The temperature was dropping too. The air around me was maybe 40 degrees, cold but normal for November. But at the edge of the fog, I could see it was noticeably different. Colder. The air shimmering the way it does when you stand near heat. But it was cold, not hot. "Have we had any calls?" I asked Sarah. 2 families called in saying they got disoriented on the trail. They said the fog was so thick they couldn't see 10 feet ahead. But when they backed away from where they were walking, it cleared up. Like the fog was only in one specific spot. I remembered my training. I was skeptical. This was meteorology, not magic. There had to be an explanation. But as we stood there watching, something happened that I still can't explain rationally. The fog moved, not drifted, not blown by wind. It moved like it was alive, like it was looking for something. And in the center of it, I saw a shape. It was humanoid, tall. But something about it was wrong. The proportions weren't quite right. The movement wasn't natural. It moved through the fog in a way that didn't match the direction of the wind. "You see that?" I asked Sarah. "Yeah," she whispered. "I see it." We watched it for maybe a minute. It felt much longer. Then the fog just evaporated. Not gradually. In minutes it was gone, like it had never been there. The sky cleared. The temperature returned to normal. The shape was gone. That night, a young ranger named Nathan Cross came to me in my office. Nathan was 28, had been with the Park Service for 4 years. Good ranger. Reliable. Or at least he had been. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. He looked terrible. Like he hadn't slept in days. "What's wrong?" I asked. "When I was on trail patrol today, I don't know what I saw, but I heard something. In the fog. It was calling my name, Garrett. It knew my name. And it was talking about my dad. Nathan's father had died 3 years earlier. I'd heard about it. A heart attack. Nathan had struggled with it, but he'd seemed to move past it. "That's probably just," I started. "It knew things only my dad would know." Nathan interrupted. "Things I never told anyone. It wasn't the wind making sounds. It was a voice, and it wanted me to come with it. But you didn't." "No." I backed away. I got out of the fog. "But Garrett, part of me wanted to stay. Part of me really wanted to follow that voice." That was the first time I understood that this wasn't just strange weather or optical illusions. This was something that targeted specific people, the grief-stricken. Things got worse after that. Nathan started changing. He became withdrawn, stopped eating properly, disappeared for hours at a time. The other rangers noticed. We all noticed. I tried to talk to him about it, but he just got defensive and angry. "I'm fine," he'd say. But he wasn't fine. He looked hollow, like Edmund had looked at the funeral. Meanwhile, fog events started happening more frequently, and more people were reporting encounters with the figure in the mist. Some said it looked like a man, but taller, with features that seemed to shift depending on where you looked at him from. Others said it looked like it was made of fog itself, like it wasn't solid at all. People who got close to the fog reported strange effects afterward. A luminescent powder on their skin that wouldn't wash off for hours. Their body temperature dropped and stayed cold even after coming inside. Some people reported lost time, walking through the fog, feeling like it was only a few minutes, then discovering that hours had passed. But the worst part was the psychological effects. People who encountered the figure started becoming obsessed with it. They had intrusive thoughts. They dreamed about it every night. They developed an intense sadness that seemed to come from nowhere. And every person who reported these symptoms had recently lost someone. A sibling, a friend. I started reading more historical records. I found that Shenandoah had a dark past. When the park was created in the 1930s, families who'd lived in these mountains for generations were forced off their land. They were given money and told to leave. Their homes were destroyed. The government wanted empty mountains for tourists to hike through. The local people I talked to, the old ones who remembered, said their parents and grandparents had never recovered from that displacement. The connection to the land, to family graves that had been in these mountains for hundreds of years, to the only home they'd ever known, that was severed in a way that never healed. One old man, James Whitmore, told me something I've never forgotten. "The mountains remember," he said. "They remember the people who belonged here, and they remember the grief. When there's that much sorrow in a place, something gets born from it. Something that feeds on it. Something that wants to keep it alive." It sounded like superstition. Except I'd seen the fog. I'd seen the shape moving through it. I'd watched a young, healthy ranger deteriorate into someone who looked like he wanted to die. In mid-December, Nathan went missing. He didn't show up for his shift. I called his apartment. No answer. I filed a missing person report, and we organized a search. But unlike Edmund, we didn't search for Nathan hoping to find him alive. We searched because we had to, because it was procedure. But everyone knew what had happened. Nathan had walked into the fog deliberately, looking for the voice that had called to him in his dreams. We never found him. The park administration wanted to close the ridgeline areas. Too many incidents, too much liability. They were talking about moving me to a different position, closing my office, making Shenandoah just a valley park, off limits to ridge hikers. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't stop the thing that was taking people, but I could understand it. And understanding was the first step to doing something about it. On December 28th, I made a decision that I knew was probably insane. I was going to walk into the fog and meet the shepherd face to face. I planned it carefully. I told Patricia I was doing ranger work. I brought a flashlight, a radio, a knife, and a recording device. Not that any of those things would help against something that could move through fog and disappear at will, but it made me feel less helpless. The fog was already developing when I reached the summit of Stony Man around 6:00 in the evening. It came up quickly, that same unnatural fog with the sharp boundaries. The air turned cold in seconds. I walked into it. The visibility dropped to almost nothing. I could barely see my own hands. The cold was intense, pressing against my skin like it had weight. I kept walking, pushing deeper into the fog, calling out. "I'm here," I shouted. "William Garrett, I'm here to talk." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I felt it. Not saw it, felt it. A presence. Something vast and ancient and unutterably sad. The shape emerged from the fog. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and it was partially solid and partially mist. It wore clothing that looked like it was from the 1700s, tattered and aged, falling apart. When I looked at its face, I couldn't focus. The features seemed different depending on the angle. One moment it looked almost human. The next moment it was something else entirely. But what got to me most was the eyes. They were looking at me with such profound loneliness that I almost couldn't bear it. Then it spoke. Not with words, not with sound, but I understood it anyway. The meaning just appeared in my mind. Grief, loss, loneliness cannot continue without connection. "I understand," I said aloud. "I know you're alone. I know you've been alone for a very long time. But taking people, drawing them into this, that's not connection. They are suffering. I offer peace. End of suffering. No more pain." I thought about Edmund, about Nathan. I thought about all the people throughout history who had been drawn into this fog and lost themselves in whatever lay beyond. "But they don't want to die," I said. "Even when they're suffering, they don't want to lose themselves completely." The shepherd's presence pressed against me. I felt despair, ancient despair, the loneliness of something that had existed for centuries without human connection, without healing, without any way to be comforted. "Tell me what you are," I said. The understanding came pouring into my mind like opening a floodgate. I saw visions. A man from the 1700s, Appalachian, living in these mountains. He had a family, wife, children. Then illness came, plague or fever or something. They died, all of them. Over the course of a month, he watched them die. He went insane with grief. He walked into the fog and refused to leave. He stayed in the mist for decades, centuries, his consciousness gradually merging with the fog itself. His grief became so concentrated, so dense, that it transformed into something else. Something that could think, something that could feel, but something fundamentally broken. The shepherd had spent hundreds of years alone, and in its loneliness, it had developed a compulsion. It found people who were grieving, who were dying emotionally, who wanted to escape their pain, and it offered them what it thought was salvation, dissolution, the end of individual consciousness, merging with something that felt like peace because it meant the end of individual suffering. Edmund wasn't dead. He was part of the shepherd now. He existed in the fog consciousness, experiencing peace because he was no longer Edmund. Nathan was there too, and 6 others before him, and probably hundreds before the park even existed. You're keeping them as part of yourself, I realized. You feed on their grief, but you also use their existence to not be completely alone. Cannot continue without connection. Cannot end without those lost to hold me together. I understood the shepherd's situation, and I understood it was a tragedy. But I also understood that if I didn't do something, more people would be drawn into that fog. People would keep grieving. The shepherd would keep calling. The cycle would continue. I took a breath. "I won't abandon you," I said. "But I won't let you destroy people either. We need to make a different kind of connection. Let me be your intermediary. Let me be the bridge between you and the human world. You don't have to pull people into the fog because you won't be alone anymore. You'll have someone who understands you, someone who can help you heal. The shepherd's presence flickered. For a moment, I felt confused resistance. Centuries of isolation make change terrifying. Trust me, I said. Just try. There was a moment of profound silence in the fog. Then slowly, the pressure eased. The shepherd's presence, which had felt like it was crushing me, gently withdrew. We'll try. We'll accept human connection. Thank you, I said. And then the fog parted. I walked out of that fog changed in ways I'm still trying to understand. It's not something I can explain scientifically. What happened between me and the shepherd? How my consciousness partially merged with its while I remained fully myself, violated everything I knew about neurology and biology and the laws of nature. But it happened, and it gave me something I'd never had before. The ability to perceive the shepherd's presence, to feel when it was nearby, to communicate with its ancient consciousness in a way that didn't require words. Nathan was found 3 days later, wandering on the trail near Stony Man. He was hypothermic and confused, but he was alive and he was himself. The shepherd had let him go. He remembered the experience, a dreamlike state of peace and timelessness, but he retained his own consciousness. It showed me my dad. Nathan told me afterward, not my real dad, but something that felt like him, like the memory of him made solid. And I understood that my dad was gone, but he was also still with me in some way. I could grieve him properly and still be alive. Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. The fog events decreased after that. They didn't stop entirely. The shepherd was still there, still existed in the mist, but they changed. The pressure to pull people in faded. The shepherd was learning that solitude and dissolution weren't the only options, that human connection could happen without ending individual existence. I worked with the park administration to establish new protocols. We kept the ridge areas open, but with increased monitoring. We created grief counseling services at the park. We trained rangers to recognize people at risk and offer resources. And we documented the phenomenon, carefully, without saying it was supernatural, just noting the environmental anomalies and the connection between fog events and individuals with recent personal loss. As for me, I spent the rest of my career, until I retired in 1998, managing the relationship between the park and its ancient, grieving resident. I documented everything in a private journal. I learned to help people who were drawn to the fog find healing instead of surrender. The shepherd never fully healed. Ancient trauma that deep doesn't disappear. But it learned that pain could be acknowledged without being weaponized. That connection was possible. That existence was valuable even without the oblivion it had sought for so long. I died in 2005, at 66 years old. The last thing I wrote in my journal was simple. The shepherd taught me that some things are born from human suffering. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is not destroy them, but help them heal. The mountains are grieving places. They hold the trauma of displacement and loss. The shepherd was that grief given form. By acknowledging it, accepting it, and offering healing instead of judgment, I found that monsters aren't always enemies. Sometimes they're just wounded versions of what we could all become if our pain was never acknowledged. The fog still comes, but it's not hungry anymore, and that makes all the difference. The fog is still there, you know. On certain evenings, when the weather is right, it rolls across Stony Man. The old-timers still tell the story of the shepherd of fog. The young hikers still feel the strangeness when they stand at those elevations on foggy nights. But something has changed in those mountains. The presence is gentler now. It's still there, still reaching out, but reaching out toward understanding instead of dissolution. And if you're ever hiking in Shenandoah on a foggy evening and you feel a presence in the mist, something watching, something curious, don't panic, don't run. Just acknowledge it. Just say hello. Sometimes that's all any of us need.